How often should you clean your aquarium filter? About once a month. Like, comment, subscribe. That's it. Oh, you're still here. You wanted more than the simple answer? Alright. Hello everyone, this is Bentley. And today, we're going to do a very simple thing. One of the most common searches on YouTube right now is, how often should you clean your aquarium filter? And what I said at the start is actually not too far off from right, but there's a lot of nuance. So, let's talk about that nuance. How often you should clean your filter really depends on the bioload that sits within your aquarium. And let me give you a few examples. Let's say that you have an aquarium like this, and you've got a sponge filter. You don't have quite as many filters as that thing does, too, but a sponge filter. Well, if you have 30 tetras in that tank, and you're feeding flake every day, that's going to create more of a bioload than, say, if you had 10 shrimp, and you were feeding every other day, right? One thing that we need to pay attention to is that the amount of food we put into our aquarium equates to an amount of waste that is produced by our fish, shrimp, snails, whatever we're keeping in our aquarium. That amount of waste will determine, in some way, shape, or form, when we should go and maintenance our filters. Now, some of the ways you can do this without being strict on timing, but realistically, it's way better if you do. Don't be me. Don't be me. My favorite go-to is I just look at my filters. And what I mean is like something like this, right? This sponge filter. When I can visibly see it starting to clog up, it's time to clean it. In the case of my power filters, if I hang on the backs of my canisters, I start looking at the flow. In the case of a canister filter, let's start there. If I start seeing flow to slow down, or more importantly, if from the output I start seeing lots of little micro bubbles of air coming out, that's when I know I absolutely need to do maintenance on my filter. Because usually what's happening is, as the sponges and media inside that canister filter start getting kind of plugged up with all the waste and mulm and all those kind of things, it causes little excess gas bubbles as the water is pushing its way through. That's when you just know that you're not getting optimal flow, and thus it's time to maintain your filter. In the case of a lot of our hang-on backs, depending on how it's set up and which hang-on back it is, might change this, but basically, if you start seeing the flow slow down, it's time to maintenance your filter. It's time to clean it, because it's the same thing. Enough particulates are getting in there that they're starting to clog up things, and it's making the water flow slow down because it takes a little bit more work for that water to get through all of your media. Once we're getting to that point, that is where effectively we're starting to lose biocapacity in our aquarium. Not necessarily, but that's the way we need to think about it, to understand that like maintenance helps because it keeps our aquariums at a more optimal condition. Now, realistically, could you just maintain an aquarium once a month and be okay? For most of us, the answer is yes. But again, it depends on what kind of bioload you're putting in your tank. If you've got a 75-gallon tank, but you've got like 30 African cichlids in that thing, that is a monster worth of waste. And so you probably have to maintain your filter a bit more often. Or if you have a really small aquarium and you have a significantly larger filter on it than you actually need, you might not need to maintain it quite as often. But will it hurt you if you maintain it more? No. We could maintain our filters every single week, and realistically what it would end up doing is probably giving us better quality of water and general parameters in our aquarium. But not all of us have that kind of time. So often what we find ourselves doing is trying to figure out what maintenance I can do. Maybe it's a rotational if you have multiple tanks or whatever, that makes it so that it's not eating up too much of your time, but you're keeping a good, healthy set of parameters for your fish or your shrimp or your snails, or whatever you're keeping in your aquarium. So that's short, right? Seems simple, seems easy, and it kind of is. The biggest thing to keep in mind is that if you start seeing changes in your aquarium, your plants don't look as good. Your fish are acting differently. Start running tests. And if you see, oh, my nitrates are suddenly a lot higher, well, that's probably time for a water change. Maybe you're dealing with, all of a sudden I've got a little bit of ammonia and nitrite. water change plus maintain your filter. It's lots of little things like this can teach us a lot. Maybe you're seeing like, oh, my pH is starting to get kind of low and it used to be higher. Well, you might want to do a water change, but also you might want to look into adding some kind of buffer to restore your KH depending on where you're living and what your water is like naturally out of the tap. But realistically, if every time you saw something different, if your first instinct was clean the filter and do a water change, you'd probably be in pretty good shape. Dilute the water down, dilute the problem down, remove some of the waste by cleaning out the filter, you will create better parameters for your fish, and more than likely, you will prevent catastrophic results, where we start getting scary things like disease and die-off and spikes and all that kind of stuff. But let's circle back. Is there actually an optimal cadence, a perfect cadence, if you will, to cleaning your filter? Yeah, but is that cadence always the same? No. Again, if you have really high bioload, but maybe you have lots of plants too, well, those plants can help keep a lot of your water parameters in good check. But inevitably, when your fish poop, when they create mold, that eventually makes its way into your filter and it starts clogging things up. So what you really want to find is the balance between the amount of maintenance you can do on your aquarium and making sure it's not going too long to where you start running into some of those problems like flow issues or lots of air bubbles or whatever the heck it may be. Big algae outbreaks. I'm dealing with algae kind of all over the place in my fish room right now. And part of it is just because I've been so busy, my maintenance has gone downhill a little bit. Still water changing, but some of the other stuff is not getting as much work. And so I'm seeing that. And more importantly, it might be my fertilizer regime's off. See? Little things like that can cause problems that you might think are different things. But until you've run into it and kind of fought that gambit enough times, you might not necessarily know this is the problem, right? So, if I were to look at everything, I got algae in this aquarium, what's the first thing I should do? Water change? Probably clean my filters. And then, monitor, test, right? And if I start seeing other problems, that leads me toward, okay, maybe it wasn't that, or maybe it puts me toward the right path to finding the solution. If you were to decide, like, here's an optimal thing, what I would say is if you could at least clean your filters once a month, you're doing pretty good. Unless you have a really, really crazy bioload. Again, like, if you had this 40-gallon breeder behind me, but you had 100 silver tip tetras in it, you probably need to clean it a little bit more regularly. Once a month might be okay if you have a pretty good-sized canister or a larger hang on the back like an AquaClear 110 or something. But if you're dealing with a smaller filter, maybe like a sponge filter, or maybe two, a matin filter, something like that, we probably want to potentially look at maintaining that every couple of weeks instead, just to make sure that we don't run into something like a spike or some other kind of problematic issue. Also, the amount of water changing we do can influence how often we should maintain our filter. General practice, when you're doing a water change, don't also do a big clean out of your filter the same day. What you might do is clean out your filter and then the next day or maybe a couple days later do your water change. And part of the reason behind this is pretty simple. Unless tons of muck comes flying out of your filter, what you're trying to do is make sure you're not potentially, and there's big quotation marks around this, impacting too much of your biological capacity in your tank, aka our beneficial bacteria, in one shot, because that's where a risk of spikes like ammonia spikes and pH crashes and things like that can potentially occur. Is it super likely? Not really. As long as you're not doing like a 90% water change and then like also like soaking all of your media in bleach or something crazy, you'll probably be okay. If you're just doing a generic rinse out of all your media, getting all the gunk out, and then doing a 50% or less water change, you can probably do it the same day and really not likely have an impact. But if you have that ability to space it out a little bit, it's playing it a little safer. That's it, guys. I really hope you've enjoyed this video. I know it's short, it's sweet, but some of these topics need to be short and sweet. Really? Because while there is nuance to everything, it's important that we have a kind of baseline understanding of why that nuance occurs, but also a baseline of just like, if I just do this, I'm probably okay until I really figure out what's perfect, and quotation marks around that, for my aquarium, aka you. What I do isn't necessarily perfect for your aquarium, so it's important that we figure out that on our own. We tinker, we mess, we figure things out with our schedules, our life, and how our tanks are set up. Let me know in the comments down below. Is there something you learned? Is there something you find interesting? What's your habit when it comes to maintaining your filters? I want to hear from you in the comments down below. If you've enjoyed this video, please consider giving a like. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. It really helps a lot of us small fish tubers. It tells YouTube, like, hey, I like this stuff, and maybe other people will too. As always, my friends, thank you so much for watching, and stay awesome.